It was an ordinary morning in the heart of New York City, where the streets were alive with the sound of honking cars, bustling pedestrians, and the constant hum of urban life. Marla Maples, a woman whose presence was as commanding as it was graceful, had just finished a quiet coffee date at her favorite cafe. Her soft curls bounced as she made her way out the door, the warmth of her smile leaving an impression on anyone she passed by. The city was familiar, comforting, and had always felt like home to her, even though the glare of fame sometimes cast long shadows over her personal life. But this morning, as she made her way down the sidewalk, something felt different. Marla's senses, finely tuned from years of navigating the complexities of public life, picked up on an unfamiliar energy in the air. The usual hum of the city seemed quieter somehow, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. It was at that very moment that she spotted him, Mark, a businessman she had met only a few years ago at a gala event. At the time he had seemed harmless enough, a familiar face in the crowd of high society. They exchanged pleasantries then, chatting about mutual acquaintances, nothing more than surface-level small talk. But now, as Marla looked up from her phone, she saw Mark standing just a few feet away, his eyes locked on hers. There was a sense of urgency in his expression, as if he had been waiting for this moment, and as soon as their gazes met, he took a step toward her. Marla was polite as always, offering a warm smile. She had nothing against Mark, and she appreciated the way he seemed to have an air of sophistication about him. They greeted each other with a simple nod, and for a brief moment everything felt like it was falling back into place. However, as they began to exchange words, a shift in Mark's tone became immediately noticeable. It was subtle at first. His voice was a little too eager, his words carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. Marla's eyebrows furrowed slightly, sensing a change in his demeanor. What was supposed to be a brief conversation about old times had somehow morphed into something more intense. She tried to brush it off, thinking that maybe he was just being overly enthusiastic. After all, they hadn't spoken in years, and perhaps he was eager to catch up. But then Mark did something that sent a ripple of unease through her body. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as if he were about to share something important. Marla instinctively took a small step back, but she was too polite to outright dismiss him. He spoke of things that made no sense at first, hints of an event from her past, something she hadn't thought about in years, something that, according to him, needed to be addressed. The words he chose were deliberate, calculated, as though he knew exactly how to plant the seeds of doubt in her mind. It wasn't that he directly accused her of anything, but the insinuations were there, hovering just beneath the surface. Mark spoke in riddles, weaving a tapestry of half-formed thoughts, and Marla was left scrambling to make sense of it. Her mind raced, sifting through memories, trying to understand what he was referring to. Was there something in her past that she had forgotten? Or was this some strange form of manipulation? She couldn't tell. The more he spoke, the more uneasy she became, but she kept her calm. Marla had been through public scrutiny before. Rumors, gossip, and false stories often came her way. She was used to it, but this time something felt different. It wasn't just idle gossip, it wasn't the usual rumors. There was a certain weight in Mark's words, a sense of urgency in his tone, that sent a chill down her spine. He claimed he had information, something he had discovered that could change everything, something that, if it became public, would shake her life to its core. Marla's heart raced. She tried to maintain control over her expression, but her hands clenched, betraying her inner tension. She took another small step back, now more visibly uncomfortable. She couldn't afford to show fear, not in the middle of a crowded street. Yet the questions kept piling up in her head. What did Mark know? How did he know it? And why was he bringing this up now, of all times? She had worked so hard to keep her past private, to live a life of peace after years of being in the public eye. She had moved on from whatever mistakes or missteps had occurred, buried them deep within, and moved forward. But Mark's presence now felt like a disruption in that calm, a reminder that no one, not even she, could fully escape their past. As he continued to speak, his words seemed to carry more weight, more significance. Marla tried to hold her composure, but the tension in the air was thick. Mark leaned in again, his voice dropping to a near whisper, and for the first time in their brief conversation, Marla felt truly unsettled. He spoke of documents, hidden truths, and secrets that only a few people knew, but what could he possibly mean by this? Her mind raced, the pieces not quite fitting together. Was he bluffing? Was he playing some kind of game with her? She didn't know, but something deep within her told her that this was no mere coincidence. She glanced around, hoping for some distraction, some interruption to break the tension, but it was just the two of them standing there, in the middle of a busy street, with the world around them oblivious to the conversation taking place. Mark, noticing her discomfort, pressed on. His words grew more insistent, his manner more forceful. Marla, for the first time in a long time, began to feel vulnerable, caught off guard by the sudden intensity of the situation. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but this felt different. This was something more than just a confrontation. This was an attack on her very identity. Finally, Marla made a decision. She needed to remove herself from this conversation before things escalated further. She politely excused herself, offering a tight smile, and gave him a firm handshake. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered or unsure. But as she turned to walk away, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something significant had just happened, something that would follow her, lingering in the background, for days to come. The days that followed the encounter with Mark were filled with a strange tension that Marla couldn't shake off. It was as if her entire world had shifted, subtly but undeniably. Though she had walked away from the conversation with him in the middle of the crowded New York street, something about his words lingered in her mind like an unwelcome shadow. She had tried to dismiss it, telling herself that it was probably just a case of an overzealous acquaintance, but she couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in her gut that something deeper was at play. Marla's routine continued, and she kept herself busy as she always did. Her mornings were filled with meetings, her afternoons spent in quiet reflection at home, and her evenings occasionally dotted with social events that kept her in the public eye. Yet no matter what she did, the thought of Mark's cryptic warnings kept creeping back into her thoughts. She couldn't push it aside, and that feeling, that sense of unease, started to grow. The idea of hidden truths and documents haunted her, its vague implications making her question everything she thought she knew about her past. It was early one Tuesday morning when it all came crashing down. Marla sat at her breakfast table, sipping her usual black coffee, scrolling through her phone as the sun streamed through the window. The room was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. That was until a notification popped up on her screen, breaking the silence with the sharp sting of an unfamiliar headline. The news article was from an entertainment blog she didn't recognize, and the title immediately grabbed her attention. Marla Maples, the truth about her past that everyone's been hiding. Marla froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips, stilled in the air as her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anything like this. The article didn't waste any time getting to the point. Within the first few lines, it suggested that there were secrets about her past that had been deliberately hidden, secrets that Mark had alluded to during their encounter. The article spoke of mysterious documents and referenced a confidential event from her past, details that, up until this point, only a handful of people knew. The writer suggested that this hidden information was about to be revealed to the public, and when it was, it would shake the very foundation of Marla's carefully constructed life. Her pulse quickened as she scrolled down, reading through the speculative theories. The article was vague, filled with broad statements about unknown events and hidden truths, but there was one thing that stood out. It seemed to be drawing directly from the conversation she had had with Mark, just days before. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Mark had been the one to plant this seed in the media. He had already started to make good on his cryptic warnings. The truth, or at least his version of it, was about to be dragged out into the light. Marla sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, trying to process the situation. How had he gotten so much information, and why had he chosen now to do this? She couldn't understand it. Mark had always seemed like a harmless businessman, nothing more than a fleeting acquaintance in the long list of people she had crossed paths with. Yet here he was, seemingly orchestrating a media storm that could unravel her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. With her hands trembling, Marla picked up her phone and dialed her public relations team. She needed answers. The phone rang twice before someone picked up, and she wasted no time. She immediately asked them if they had seen the article. Her PR manager, a woman named Claire, took a moment to process the question, and then she confirmed that they had indeed seen it. Claire's voice was calm, but there was an undertone of concern in her words. The rumors had already begun circulating, and the article was just the beginning. It seemed that someone was determined to dig into Marla's past, and the whispers were growing louder. Claire reassured Marla that they would handle it, that they would issue a statement to clarify the situation, but Marla wasn't convinced. She could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting with every passing minute. Her reputation, her life, everything she had worked so hard to protect, was being threatened. And it wasn't just the media attention that worried her. It was the idea that Mark had control over this narrative. If he had information, if he had some hidden document, then this could spiral out of control quickly. Marla spent the rest of the day in a haze, trying to focus on her work, but unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. Her thoughts were consumed by the possibilities of what might happen next. Would the media continue to dig deeper into her life? Would Mark release whatever documents he had mentioned? What if this was just the beginning of something much worse? As the evening rolled around, Marla found herself at a gala event, trying her best to appear composed. The event was high-profile, filled with celebrities and influencers, but Marla could barely focus on the conversations around her. Her mind was elsewhere, consumed by the very real fear that her carefully curated life was on the brink of collapse. Her friends, noticing the shift in her demeanor, asked if she was okay, but she merely nodded, offering a forced smile. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her train of thought. She glanced at the screen, half expecting more headlines or notifications about the ongoing rumors, but what she saw instead was far worse. A new notification popped up, this time from a social media account she didn't recognize. It was a video, one that seemed to be a direct response to the media coverage about her. The thumbnail was of Mark, standing in a dimly lit room, his face serious as he looked directly into the camera. The caption underneath read, "The truth about Marla Maples. The secrets she doesn't want you to know." Her heart sank as she tapped the video to watch. The footage was grainy, shot in what appeared to be a private office or study. Mark spoke directly to the camera, his tone ominous, as he promised to reveal the truth about Marla's past. He mentioned documents, physical, tangible evidence that he claimed could expose her in ways she hadn't imagined. He spoke of a hidden chapter in her life that, if uncovered, would leave the public stunned. Marla's mind raced as she watched, her thoughts spinning in circles. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when the hidden truths Mark had spoken of would be brought into the public eye. The video ended with Mark giving a cryptic warning. "The truth always comes out, and when it does, you'll see who the real Marla Maples is." The video was everywhere within minutes. It spread across social media platforms, picked up by news outlets, and began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others critical, but the tone of the narrative was clear. Mark's words had struck a nerve. The public, already hungry for any juicy tidbits of celebrity scandal, devoured it. The rumors were now a full-blown media frenzy. As Marla sat alone in the corner of the gala, watching the video spread like wildfire, she realized that this was no longer just about her past, it was about her future. Mark's game had only just begun, and she was left with the daunting task of figuring out how to take control of the narrative before it completely consumed her. With the video gaining momentum and the media relentless in its pursuit of the next big story, Marla knew that she had only one option left. She had to act fast or risk losing everything. The next morning, Marla woke up to a world that had shifted beneath her feet. The previous day's events had triggered a cascade of reactions that were now sweeping across every media platform and social network. The video Mark had posted had gone viral, and within hours it became the subject of every conversation. News outlets picked it up, gossip blogs ran wild with speculation, and every headline seemed to echo the same words: "The truth about Marla Maples." Marla sat up in her bed, staring at her phone as the constant stream of notifications filled her screen. Her heart sank as she scrolled through the endless articles and posts that dissected every word Mark had said, scrutinizing her past in ways she had never imagined. The pressure of the situation was beginning to mount, and Marla knew she could no longer remain passive. She had been thrust into the spotlight once again, but this time it wasn't for anything she had chosen to share with the world. No, this was a different kind of attention, one that threatened to tear down everything she had worked for. It was no longer a question of whether or not Mark would reveal his documents. He had already done that in his own way. The public was now hungry for more, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. Marla's mind raced as she considered her options. Should she release a statement, publicly confronting the allegations head-on? Should she try to deny everything and wait for the storm to pass? Neither option seemed ideal, but she knew she couldn't stay silent for long. The longer she waited, the more she risked losing control of the narrative. As a woman who had spent years carefully crafting her public image, the thought of letting someone else dictate her story was unbearable. She took a deep breath and called her PR manager, Claire. Claire's voice on the other end was calm, but Marla could tell that she too was feeling the weight of the situation. It was no longer just about handling a few rumors or a small scandal. This was a full-blown media firestorm, and it was getting worse with every passing hour. Marla knew that she needed to make a decision, and she needed to make it fast. The two of them discussed possible strategies. Claire suggested a carefully worded statement that would clarify Marla's position and refute the false claims. But Marla wasn't convinced that a simple statement would be enough. This wasn't just a matter of setting the record straight. It was about regaining control over her own story. She couldn't let Mark's video define her, not when she had worked so hard to move past her mistakes. She knew that if she was going to face this head-on, she needed to be proactive. After hanging up with Claire, Marla sat quietly in her living room, staring out the window as the reality of the situation set in. Her phone rang again, and when she saw the name flashing on the screen, she braced herself for what was to come. It was a call from her lawyer, Greg, who had been monitoring the situation closely. His tone was serious, and Marla immediately knew that things had taken a darker turn. Mark's video had already started to attract the attention of not just the press, but legal authorities as well. There was talk of potential defamation suits, and it was clear that Mark's actions were now becoming a legal matter. But Marla wasn't sure how much weight a defamation suit would carry in a world where public opinion could be shaped by a single viral video. Greg explained that he had already spoken to some of the media outlets that were covering the story. He had tried to calm the storm, but it was clear that things were escalating beyond anyone's control. Mark's video had struck a nerve, and the public was now fixated on the idea of a hidden truth, something that could shatter Marla's carefully curated persona. Greg advised her to take immediate action, either by addressing the issue publicly or by taking legal measures to prevent further damage. But Marla knew that the clock was ticking, and every second of indecision was making things worse. Marla decided to meet with Greg in person to discuss her options further. She couldn't keep going back and forth on the phone. This required a more serious conversation, one that would help her figure out the best course of action. She was done sitting idly by while someone else pulled the strings of her life. It was time for her to take control, no matter the cost. When they met, the tension in the air was palpable. Greg laid out her options in a calm and methodical way, but Marla couldn't help but feel a growing sense of panic. Every path seemed fraught with danger. If she went public with a statement, it could be seen as an admission of guilt. If she did nothing, the rumors would continue to spiral out of control. Her life, which had been so carefully constructed, was unraveling before her eyes. As they spoke, Marla couldn't help but think back to her encounter with Mark. What had he been hoping to achieve by doing this? Was he trying to ruin her career, or was he merely trying to get attention for himself? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Mark wasn't just some random businessman with an axe to grind. He was part of a larger game, a game that she was now unknowingly caught up in. But what was the end goal? What did he want from her? And why was he so intent on bringing this past truth to light? The conversation with Greg lasted longer than expected, and as the day wore on, Marla's anxiety only grew. She knew she couldn't stay in hiding forever, but the thought of going public with her past filled her with dread. Her entire career, her reputation, everything she had worked for could be destroyed in an instant. She had always prided herself on being an open book, but there were parts of her story that she had chosen to keep buried. She wasn't ready for those secrets to come to the surface, especially not at the hands of someone like Mark. By the time the evening rolled around, Marla had made up her mind. She would take control of the situation herself. The next day she would release a statement. But this wouldn't be just any statement. It would be an open letter to the public, an honest and direct account of her side of the story. She would acknowledge the rumors, but she would also make it clear that the truth was hers to tell. She wouldn't let Mark define her, and she certainly wouldn't let the media twist her words into something they weren't. As Marla sat in front of her laptop that night, drafting the letter, she felt a sense of empowerment. It was time to stop running from her past, and it was time to stop letting others control her narrative. With each keystroke, she felt the weight of the situation lifting, and for the first time since the incident began, she began to feel in control again. The public would hear her side of the story, and they would understand that there was more to her than the sensationalized headlines they had been fed. But as Marla prepared to send the letter out the next morning, another wave of fear hit her. What if it wasn't enough? What if the media machine was too powerful to stop? She couldn't afford to let that doubt take root. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. The fallout was inevitable, but she would face it head on, with grace and determination. The next chapter of her life was about to begin, and she would be the one to write it. The morning after Marla had finalized her open letter to the public, she sat at her desk staring at the screen with a sense of anticipation. She had spent hours crafting the words carefully, making sure to acknowledge the rumors while simultaneously asserting control over her own narrative. It was a carefully calculated move, one that would require finesse and strength. But as her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. Marla glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name attached to the message. Mark. The message was simple, but chilling. "It's not over yet. The truth is coming." She stared at it for a long moment, her pulse quickening. She had hoped that Mark would simply fade into the background after his initial viral video, but this message made it clear that he wasn't going away anytime soon. He was still playing the game, and the stakes were higher than ever. Marla took a deep breath and deleted the message. She couldn't afford to let his words rattle her. She had already made the decision to fight back, and she wasn't going to let him intimidate her now. The media frenzy was still ongoing, and it seemed as though every new article and video posted about her was laced with speculation and half-truths. But today she was determined to take control, to be the one who dictated the course of this narrative. By noon, the open letter was ready. Marla's team had vetted every word, ensuring it would send the right message to the public. She was not going to let her life be defined by someone else's version of events. She wasn't going to hide behind vague statements or let others fill in the blanks for her. She would be transparent, she would address the rumors head-on, and she would prove that she was in control of her own story. As she sat back in her chair, Marla felt a sense of resolve settle over her. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She clicked the send button, releasing the letter to the world. The weight of the action hit her immediately, and for a moment she sat there, holding her breath. The next few hours would be crucial. Would the public accept her side of the story, or would Mark's words continue to hold sway? The letter spread quickly across social media, making its way to every corner of the internet. The tone was firm, but measured, and it gave the world a glimpse of the woman behind the headlines. Marla addressed the rumors with grace, acknowledging her past without hiding from it. She made it clear that the secrets Mark alluded to were not the bombshells. They seemed to be. Instead, they were just a part of her journey, a journey that she had long since moved beyond. As the hours passed, the media's attention seemed to shift. While the video Mark posted still had a foothold in certain circles, Marla's statement gave her a level of credibility that Mark had never been able to achieve. She hadn't just reacted to the rumors, she had taken the initiative, and in doing so, she had regained control of the conversation. But that didn't mean it was over. Not by a long shot. Later that evening, as Marla was preparing to relax after a long day, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from one of the major news outlets. The headline screamed at her from the screen. Mark finally exposes the truth about Marla Maples, documentary coming soon. She stared at it for a long moment, her stomach tightening. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. Mark had done it. He had released a full-fledged documentary, and by the looks of it, it was going to be even worse than the video. Marla felt her heart race as she clicked on the article. The documentary, as it turned out, was filled with interviews, photos, and more details about the mysterious documents Mark had referenced. It painted a picture of Marla's past that she had long since left behind. It painted her as someone who had hidden behind a facade, someone who had used her fame and relationships to cover up a much darker truth. The documentary promised to expose everything, and its release was imminent. For a brief moment, Marla was paralyzed by fear. The idea of her life being laid bare before the world, of her past being paraded around like a circus, was too much to bear. She had fought so hard to move past those dark chapters, to be seen as more than just the sum of her mistakes. And now, here was Mark about to drag all of it back into the light, but then, as she sat there, stewing in her own anxiety, something inside her clicked. Mark's documentary was nothing more than an attempt to control the narrative, to capitalize on her past in order to make a name for himself. He was exploiting her vulnerability, and he was doing it in the most public and humiliating way possible. But what he didn't realize was that Marla had already taken that power back. The open letter, her response to the rumors, had already shown the world that she wasn't afraid to confront the past. Now it was time to finish what she had started. Marla made a decision. She would confront Mark directly. It wasn't enough to let his documentary speak for him. She needed to speak for herself. She contacted her lawyer, Greg, immediately. It was time to take action, and this time it would be on her terms. Together they drafted a legal response to the documentary, one that would refute the claims made in the film and expose the manipulation behind it. It wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about setting the record straight once and for all. The legal letter was sent out the next morning. It was direct and forceful, calling out Mark for his attempts to defame her and manipulate the media. It wasn't a simple denial, it was a statement of intent. Marla was done being passive. She was taking control of her story, and she was going to make sure the world knew it. The response was swift. The media buzzed with the news of the legal action, and the public began to turn against Mark. It became clear that the documentary was not the unbiased exposé it had claimed to be, but rather a one-sided attack designed to make a profit off of Marla's pain. The backlash against Mark was immediate, and the documentary began to lose steam. Marla's decision to fight back had paid off. As the days passed, the media coverage began to shift again, this time in her favor. People began to rally behind her, applauding her for standing up to Mark and refusing to let him control her narrative. The public, it seemed, had seen through his manipulation. Marla's reputation, while still under scrutiny, had been restored to a degree. She had regained control of her story, and she had done it on her own terms. Mark, on the other hand, found himself in the midst of a public relations disaster. The support he had garnered with his viral video began to evaporate as the truth about his intentions came to light. The media began to question his motives, and it didn't take long for people to see him for what he truly was, a man seeking fame at the expense of someone else's reputation. In the end, Marla emerged from the storm stronger than ever. She had faced her past, taken responsibility for it, and confronted those who sought to exploit it. And in doing so, she had proven that no matter how dark the secrets may be, she would always rise above. The final showdown was over, and she had won.